together. There is power when we organize. Power when we stand and fight together. There is power when we organize.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a Diversified Media Enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka says despite not supporting Trump, the Labor Federation has met with Trump's administration, laying out things that would help workers. The AFL-CIO also has made it clear that if Trump embraces policies that really help workers, the AFL-CIO will support those policies. But Trumka says instead of helping workers, Trump has been hurting us, and the AFL-CIO's advice on how to really help workers, for the most part, has been ignored.
When he started attacking things like health and safety standards, coal mine standards, and those regulations, I had several meetings with the administration, told them the adverse and bad effect that that had on workers, showed them a position that would reverse that and actually help workers, make places more safe or increase wages, and gave that to the administration. Unfortunately, in most cases, that wasn't taken.
Organized labor is part of the Hurricane Harvey relief effort. The Texas Workers Relief Fund was set up by the Texas AFL-CIO. The National AFL-CIO is donating $100,000 to that fund and is raising $5 million more. The AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust is also investing $500 million over 5 years into affordable housing in areas affected by Harvey. National Nurses United is deploying over 1,000 volunteer nurses to hurricane-hit areas, from first responders to IBEW electrical workers working overtime to restore and repair damage to the electric power grid. Labor is pitching in to help. The AFL-CIO also says the Building Investment Trust, a bank collective trust that provides risk-adjusted returns for union pension plans, and ULICO, a labor movement-affiliated financial service company, are working with the AFL-CIO on job-creating commercial real estate and infrastructure investment. The AFL-CIO's Liz Schuler says working people and our unions all across America are giving our cash donations, our investment capital, and our solidarity. Gallup says 61% of Americans approve of labor unions. It's the annual poll Gallup has been doing on unions since 1936, always showing strong support for labor unions. Gallup says that number is the highest percentage since the 65% approval recorded in 2003. According to decades of annual Gallup polling results, historically unions have enjoyed strong support from the American public. In 1936, 72% of Americans approved of labor unions. Union approval peaked in the 1950s when it reached 75% in 1953 and 1957.
Let's get America working. We must build, maintain, and repair our nation's crumbling infrastructure. Teamsters support a bipartisan approach to creating good jobs for American workers. Learn more at letsgetamericalworking.com. Teamsters strong, America stronger.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Wow, what a hurricane. In fact, 3 hurricanes back to back. That hasn't happened in, wow, almost forever. And you look at the damage, the devastation. And I keep coming back to all of the people who keep saying, no, that climate change, that's not real. I think that, and maybe this is one of those moments where you go, maybe we should be to raise awareness to the people who are perpetrating this hoax theory. Maybe we should be naming these storms after them. Just a thought, because, these are the people who keep saying, no, there's nothing to see here. And to be honest, you look at some of the video of the island that was just basically like 95% of it just wiped away. There really is almost nothing to see there. And the question is, when will we, or will we ever? I'm told we've got about 3 years to start making some serious major changes to maybe try and mitigate some of the future damage. Will we? Can we? I don't know. Because I look at what's coming out of D.C., and where are all the crazy right-wing evangelicals saying God's angry with us now that the Republicans control everything, and we're doing the hate stuff. Let's kick those immigrant kids out of here. Just crazy, just crazy. And was yesterday a full moon? Did I miss the full moon? Because it looks like the president completely backdoored the Republican leadership. And in a way that you just go, wow. You actually had Donald Trump siding with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer in the face of Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. They had their big meeting, their big powwow. And at the moment where you're supposed to give someone the rose or, choose who you're going off into la la land with, he chose the Democrats. And you go, because understand, what the Republicans wanted was a long-term debt ceiling increase. They wanted 18 months. And then they backed down to 12 and then 6. And then, the Democrats are saying, no, let's do 3 months. We'll pay our bills. We'll fund the Harvey relief and we'll move forward. And Trump said, okay, that's simple. No pound of flesh, no offsets, no, hey, let's steal from granny, no, hey, let's take food out of the mouths of children, none of that. And, I got to be honest, I was prepping for it. I was ready for, some argument around, okay, we have to raise the debt ceiling, but in order to do it, we want money for the wall, or we want, again, kick granny off of Social Security, whatever. I was expecting it. And last night I was just, it's like, what? Because understand, I've been conditioned to think this way. We all have. And that's why I think the shock today is so enormous, because we've been conditioned over the last 8 years to anticipate every time there's we bump up against that self-imposed ceiling. Now understand, I think the debt ceiling is stupid. I think it's probably the dumbest thing we've done, because understand, in my household, our debt ceiling is based on what I can spend. See, here's the problem with the debt ceiling. It's money that we've already spent. We're just paying the bills. We've already said, okay, we're going to allocate money for that. We're going to spend it. We've decided, we passed legislation. It's spent. All we're now deciding is, well, if we're going to decide to pay it. And I wish I could do that in my house. I wish I could call the credit card companies and go, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm up against my debt ceiling. I can't pay you. I wish that were possible. It's not. But this is the gig, this is the game, this is the ridiculous nonsense that Congress has self-imposed on itself so that we can have these crises. And I would argue that the Republicans have used masterfully to claw back a lot of benefits for working people. And they've done them, really, over the Obama years, they used it masterfully. Now, here's the problem, and this is where, again, Mr. Art of the Deal, honestly, he got played. Because all the cards he was holding 4 aces and he lost to a pair of deuces. You just go, how's that possible? And that's why the Republicans, I think, are just so flipping mad. And then you combine that with the DACA flip there going, We're terminating it. We're getting rid of it. Oh, well, wait, maybe it'll be 6 months down the road. And, oh, maybe Congress will fix it. Oh, we'll have to revisit it. What? What are you talking about? And this is where, the Republicans are, scratching their heads going, don't know. And this is going to be interesting because now I had thought this would be part of the leverage for tax reform because, hey, we want tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires, right? Want to make sure big corporations get their massive windfall, right? This would have been the leverage to get Democrats, or at least a handful, to go, okay, we got to raise the debt ceiling. We don't want to shut the government down because understand, I don't honestly believe there would be one Democrat. And I know this is going out on the ledge, but I don't think there would be one Democrat who would have voted to shut the government down. I mean, that's the kind of strong hand the Republicans had here. And Trump gave it away. And look, I rarely say this, and it's been something that I'm not going to say today he became presidential. I'm not going to say anything stupid like that. But this was the first moment that he actually did something that was right. I've argued for years that this debt ceiling fight is ridiculous, it's stupid, and it should not be holding us hostage. We shouldn't be telling the world every couple of months or every year or so, oh, hey, get ready for a global calamity. Get ready for the global economy to come to a screeching halt because the strongest economy in the world, the one that basically backs almost all economic activity in the world, is going to come to a screeching halt. I mean, it's wow. And I think about a friend of mine who was a former congressman who said, this used to be, before Obama and before most of the Bush term, this used to be a yawn vote. You went in because you already spent the money. You went in, you voted to increase it because you had to. So the Republicans are freaked out. They're losing their minds, which is a good thing in my view. It shows that there are divisions there that can be hopefully exploited so that we have no more real insanity, and maybe we get a tax reform bill that actually helps working people. Maybe, because look, I'm not against fiddling with the tax form. I'm not against the idea of making it simpler. I'm not against the idea of closing loopholes. I'm not against the idea of doing any of that stuff. But here's the thing: we've seen this movie before, where they go, oh, we're going to cut all these loopholes and we're going to lower the rates and it's going to be great. It's going to bring all kinds of money into the coffers. It's going to be great. And we've seen it, again, several times, and it's never worked. Now, they point to the 1 year where it actually did bring in a little bit more money because they did. They dropped that top marginal rate down a little bit so people were paying their taxes and didn't have the ability to use these loopholes to avoid them. And then immediately the next year, Congress started giving back loopholes. So it's insane. And now look, I'm a big fan of loopholes if you have a rate high enough to pay for them. You go back to the good socialist president, Dwight David Eisenhower, and his tax code. You had a 92% top marginal tax rate. If you made $1.6 million in today's dollars, you were taxed that dollar above $1.6 million at 92%. Now, nobody paid that. I mean, the effective rate, I guess, was somewhere in the 60s. But it was still in the 60s, which meant there was a lot of money coming in to, build things like a highway system, to pay our bills so that we're not, $20 trillion in debt. Everyone keeps saying, hey, we're running out of money. You're right, because we're giving it all away to special interests. And I'm not against changing that. The problem is everything I see coming out of the Republicans is, hey, how can we cut the tax rates even further? How can we slash our revenues even further so that we can be completely ineffective? It's really quite maddening. But it's going to be interesting to see the fallout of Trump's decision and what it's going to do to the Republican tax reform. Because look, they actually thought, hey, we got a winning strategy. They were out there lobbying, saying this is what we're going to do. We're going to leverage Harvey. We're going to leverage the debt ceiling. We're going to get what we want. And he just pulled the rug right out from under him. Interesting times. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Bill Scheer is going to be here, contributing editor over at Politico Magazine. Get some of his thoughts on the recent events. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
There's a flaw in the system, and the fly in the ointment is going to bring the whole thing down. Floodgates are open, we've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken, and we've fallen for the ruse.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1916. That was the day that the Federal Employees Compensation Act was signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson. The act was sponsored by Senator John Kern, a Democrat from Indiana, and Daniel McGillicuddy, a Democratic congressman from Maine. The act provided compensation for federal civil service employees that lost wages because they were hurt or killed on the job. There was great debate at the time over whether employees injured at work deserved to be compensated. Before the turn of the 20th century, those who sustained workplace injuries had little recourse. Employers blamed workers for accidents and typically refused compensation, leaving families destitute. Edward Gaynor, the president of the National Association of Letter Carriers, explained the debate around the 1916 proposal, saying, quote, "The only question, the fundamental question involved in this discussion is whether or not society should bear the burden of the injured worker in any industry." Increasingly, some lawmakers were beginning to make the case that society should indeed bear that burden. Workers and labor leaders organized around issues of workplace safety and demanded a compensation if they were injured on the job. The law providing such a safety net for federal employees was passed through the House of Representatives by an overwhelming margin of 288 to 6. Although the act only applied to federal employees, it was an important step forward in recognizing that all workers deserve to be compensated for workplace injuries. The Federal Office of Workers' Compensation Programs that operates today traces its history directly back to the 1916 Act. And because of this 1916 Act, 3 million federal employees and their families are covered under the Act's protections.
Okay, yeah, throw them out. Throw them out into the cold. You know, don't give them their coat. No coats. No coats. Confiscate their coat. You know, you can't win. By the way, just to finish, I had one word left, Iraq.
I'm out in the cold, body and soul.
Well, how's the cold? Every report I'm seeing, that's how the Republicans are seeing it. Look like I got kicked out of the hall without their coat into the cold over this debt ceiling. And look, yesterday we were talking about how they were going to be able to leverage it to get some cuts to some other things, leverage it for their tax deformed deals. There was a lot of hope for the Republicans yesterday, and well, today the bubble just went burst. Sads for them. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about it and give some of his thoughts. I've asked Bill Scheer. He's a contributing editor over at Politico Magazine. Bill, thanks for taking time for us.
Always a pleasure.
So, what do you think? Did he just kick all the Republican leadership out in the cold?
Well, he certainly. I mean, not just on this debt ceiling matter, but he has been attacking Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan for weeks now, questioning their competence as leaders, saying they're not getting enough done in Congress. He excoriated McConnell over failing to repeal Obamacare. He mocked him for not getting a debt ceiling increase attached to a veterans bill last month. All the indications are, and this is actually reported in Politico a couple weeks ago, his advisors are telling Trump, separate yourself from the Republican Congress. Don't get dragged down into their morass. Don't become part of the swamp. Set yourself apart, and you'll be in better shape for 2020. And that's fine if you don't care about passing legislation, if you don't care about keeping control of Congress after the 2018 midterm elections, because he is handing Democrats a narrative that it's the Republicans in Congress that can't get anything done.
And truthfully, the Republicans have shown they can't get anything done.
Well, they're not. They're never ready for prime time. You know, they're the dog that caught the car, but they don't have a president who seems to have any interest in legislation. I mean, that's where I think people's little calculations go a little haywire. Normally, when you're president, you do things designed to help you get things passed that you can sign.
Right. He has an agenda, but he doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, he has things he likes to say on the stump. He likes to say we're going to build a wall and things like that. But he's just as happy to have a rose garden ceremony when a bill passes the House or sign an executive order that doesn't actually do anything than sign real legislation, because it's all about the optics and the fighting and the drama, not about actual governing.
And all about his ego. I mean, the attention. You know, this is what I've been saying for a while. I mean, this guy's got an attention problem. He needs the adoration of the cameras and of the people, and it's painfully obvious.
Well, but you can get attention by signing legislation too. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to get attention.
Yeah, but that takes work.
Well, it does take work, and I think his most loyal fans, his voters, they don't necessarily care about getting legislation. They want to be in the fight. They want to make liberals mad. They want to make the media mad. They want to make the feckless Republican leaders mad. That's more emotionally satisfying than actually doing the hard work of policy trade-offs and crafting legislation. So McConnell and Ryan, who are legislators, they have a totally different outlook on what the job is than their own president does, and that's going to lead to situations like what you had yesterday.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, in Trump's defense, and I can't believe I'm going to do this, he really has no idea how the process really works. I mean, he's been on the outside sniping and doing all that stuff, but he really doesn't know how the sausage is made, and I don't think he really has the curiosity level to actually find out.
Well, it's hard to know exactly what propelled Trump to do what he did yesterday, but from what I can tease out in Politico's reporting, you know, they had said that Republicans asked for 18 months time frame for the debt ceiling increase that would get past the next election. That would be no more dramas between now and then.
Right.
Democrats refused. Then they came with 6 months. Democrats refused. And the Treasury Secretary was in mid-sentence making the case for a longer time frame when Trump cut him off and gave Democrats the 3 months they were asking for, which gives Democrats more because they get negotiating leverage every time there's a pinch point. And they said in the story, Trump was tiring of the back and forth. So that says to me,
it was
this
nap
was
time.
Boring. This was boring for Trump. This was not a fun meeting. This was a lot of hard work. He's like, I don't care. Get this over with. I want to go do a rally now.
Yeah, it's nap time. I need my 2 dishes of ice cream.
But to mildly defend Trump here, I mean, the debt ceiling is not that it should be a hot potato. If you're Trump and you don't care what comes out of the next negotiation, sure, 3 months, 6 months, 18 months, what's the difference? I don't care. If this is going to end the meeting and get us moving on, sure, why not?
Yeah, if it gets me to my ice cream, so much be it. Now, another point yesterday that another thing that ticked off legislators is you had Ivanka show up, I guess out of the blue, unannounced, and kind of just crashing the meeting.
Well, there's some dispute whether she was there just to say hi or whether she was there to actually make a pitch for her child care tax credit. The little window dressing they keep trotting out to make Trump seem like he's compassionate and cares about middle-class concerns, yet never seems to materialize into actual policy.
Right.
And then after that, they went off to North Dakota together, where Trump let everybody know that, yes, Daddy, may I please come to the rally and talk about child care tax credit. So, I mean, the bigger story here is that she is being used in a really pathetic and transparent way to make Trump's tax reform idea seem like it's middle-class friendly, when almost everything that's being proposed is just same old Republican tax giveaways to the rich, and nothing about actually reducing inequality and making the tax code fairer.
Are you the only one who's kind of creeped out about the whole, daddy thing? I mean, come on. At this point, grow up a little. I mean,
it's the whole thing is a little weird. But the Trump mentality is that they treat their family as a brand, and I can only presume that amongst his fans, the notion of a doting daughter constantly looking up to her to her patriarch is an image that they find resonates. To a lot of other people, it is kind of creepy and weird, but it certainly hasn't hurt him amongst his loyal base.
Yeah, I just think it's creepy and it's weird. But again, this is the same guy who said, if she weren't his daughter, he'd be dating her.
Yeah, in the annals of creepy things he has said, I suppose this is low on the list.
Well, there is that. But here's the thing. I mean, yesterday this debt ceiling deal really wasn't the only thing that threw the Republican leadership under the bus. You look at DACA now, and him saying, first we're going to trash it, then it's 6 months, and then we may revisit it. I mean, he's been all around this issue, and then there's even reports of saying, people saying his age. He asked his age to say, how can I get out of this?
Well, this is another example of just how politically amateurish Trump is, and how weak his deal making skills are. So, you're the president. You have a fair amount of leeway. You've all the leeway in the world what issues you want to prioritize, what you choose to talk about on this stuff. Some issues get forced onto your table, but you can decide what is a priority for you. And typically, you try to pick issues that are going to unite your party and divide the other party, so you can pick off some and help you get your agenda passed.
Right.
So here is an issue where it completely unites the Democratic Party, and it deeply divides the Republican Party. It's the one piece of all the various immigration issues where the immigrants at stake are the most sympathetic.
Yep.
People who had who were forced to come here, who had no idea. They were kids. They had no idea they were breaking any kind of civil rules. They're contributing to society. They're working. They're going to school. All the polling shows, super majorities think they should be able to stay. And of all the things Republicans in the Congress have to work on right now, I mean, they're having a problem keeping the government open. So they don't want to be dealing with this. They don't have to. And Trump throws this enormous hot potato in their lap, which pits them against the anti-immigrant views of their base and the pro-dreamer views of the rest of the country. It's completely politically illogical, but it's all part of a narrative where Trump says, I did what I said I was going to do. I said in the campaign I was going to scrap this because Obama's order was unconstitutional, which is different than saying the policy was bad. And it's now Congress's job to figure out the policy. And if they screw it up, it's their fault, not my fault.
Yeah, well, you look at it. That's it's kind of smart on his part. Then, so maybe the Art of the Deal book wasn't completely written by somebody else.
I guess, although but to the extent you actually want to make Congress do their job, I mean, it's obviously cruel to use 800,000 people as bargaining chips. So I'm not endorsing this on a human level, but Congress does often respond to deadline pressure. So it's a proverbial gun to their head to say you better pass this, or these 800,000 people are going to get hauled off, and it's going to be one and not in a day over the course of several months or years, because it depends when their individual permits expire, right, and when IC finds them. But this could happen all across the country. Every individual one's going to get on TV. It could be very sympathetic. It's going to be legal fights, and it's going to happen one after another. So you better pass something before you hit the deadline. Now Trump has said, well, maybe it's not a deadline. We'll just drag this out in perpetuity because we'll revisit it if Congress can't pass something. So now there's even less incentive for Congress to pass something, which leaves the people in more limbo for a more undefined period of time. It's the exact opposite of how you would govern if you cared about governing, but again, that's not what Trump actually cares about.
Yeah, and that's the exact point. And I make that argument about the Republican Party. You know, they were elected on the premise that government doesn't work, and then once they're in power and they are in complete power, they prove it. They prove that their version of government can't possibly work.
I mean, and there's a certain perverse logic to that in terms of we don't want to grow government. We don't want to have active government to make people think government is inherently flawed. That serves our longer-term ideological goals. But I think what we're seeing here goes way beyond anything that clever or strategic. These are people who, and not just Trump. I mean, you had 6 years of Republicans controlling either the House and or the Senate, doing nothing to create serious policy and work with the president to say, here's our vision for governing the country. It was just repeal Obamacare and block judges and force showdowns over the debt and the budget. And so when they actually got in charge and they had to say, we have to follow through on our campaign pledge to approve Obamacare, how do we do that exactly? So that's not just Trump. That's a disease that goes up and down the Republican body, and they still haven't figured out what to do to prove they know the basics of governing the country, which I would say under normal circumstances would be their political death knell in 2018, except the map is very unfavorable to Democrats, and Democrats have their own divisions to worry about, so you can't be 100% sure they can take advantage of that situation, but they're still doing everything possible, Republicans, to keep their time in power very short.
Yeah, well, they're working on it, but the Democrats as well. And I wanted to get your thoughts, final thoughts on, Hillary's going to be doing a book tour next week. Evidently, have come out and said, it was Bernie's fault, some mortal wounds. Curious your thoughts on the big book tour.
Actually, there's a piece that may get published in Politico soon for me on this very topic. I think we've seen that in the aftermath of the election, Bernie's influence in the party has risen considerably. I mean, he's the most influential he's ever been in his career. You're seeing, several 2020 presidential candidates announce, I'm going to endorse Bernie's Medicare for All bill, which is supposed to drop next week. You saw Chuck Schumer release his Better Deal package, which is very focused on breaking up monopolies in a nod to Bernie's views on corporate power. Bernie was invited into the leadership along with Joe Manchin, who's from the most conservative state in the country, to say, look what a big tent we have. We incorporate all voices. Hey, Bernie Kratz, please stay. Don't go running off to a third party. So I don't think that every Democrat, in their heart of hearts, wants to embrace the entirety of Bernie's agenda, but they're clearly afraid of losing his voters. So now Hillary comes out basically alone and saying, wait a second, Bernie's not really a Democrat. Bernie is not interested in helping Democrats win. He's helping more into disrupting the Democratic Party. Don't hand over the keys to Bernie. Now, is that a voice that's going to be heeded amongst Democrats? I think that's going to depend a lot on how well this book tour is received. So as it stands, most Democrats are trying to keep Bernie happy and keep his voters happy. If Hillary can show, there's a constituency out there that does not like Bernie and is very concerned about what he's doing, is that going to lead to some other 2020 candidate, which I assume would not be Hillary, but to say, there's space for me here. There's space for someone to be critical of Bernie, and not treat him like Kid Grubbs, not treat him like he's America's lovable grandpa. And if that happens, you're going to have an even more intense fight amongst party people going through the 2020 primary.
Yeah, and also, while the Republicans are struggling and may be vulnerable in 2018, the Democrats and all the people on that side are opening the door wide open for 2 more years of Republican rule.
That's the danger. In a large respect, having this fight amongst Democrats is unavoidable because there's no consensus why Hillary lost. Hillary's obviously making her case in her book, but there's also the case where that so there's the case that Hillary would have won if not for Russia and James Comey and Bernie undermining her in the primary and having some of his voters stay home or vote Green or what have you.
And the fact she ran a crummy campaign.
Well, the other argument is that she ran a crummy campaign. She had terrible neoliberal policies. She missed the populist moment. And if we pick someone who's a totally different kind of Democrat in the Bernie mold, then that person is going to win. There's no consensus in the party which of those narratives is true, and there's no way to resolve it without having a whole other fight about it, and maybe with other fights added on to that in 2020. So it's not a question of whether we're going to have a fight or not. We're going to have a fight. Hillary's now indicating she wants in that fight, and whether that helps to come to a speedier conclusion because we're laying it all on the table, or it's going to make things even more divisive, that remains to be seen.
Well, here comes the bloodbath. It'll be interesting to watch. Bill, I appreciate you taking some time and sharing some of your thoughts.
Always a pleasure. Take care.
Always great talking with you. Bill Scheer, contributing editor over at Politico Magazine. You want to check out some of his stuff, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour special report. I'm Mark Boulanger. The largest labor federation in the United States, the AFL-CIO, is condemning racist and neo-Nazi actions coming out of the Donald Trump administration. The federation represents some 12 million members in 56 national and international unions. At the start of the Trump administration, the federation said it would work with the White House on programs which would help American workers. Programs such as national infrastructure rebuilding. It agreed, for example, to participate in a committee called the Council on Manufacturing. That changed when Donald Trump reacted to a demonstration where a young woman was killed while protesting a march by racist, anti-Semitic neo-Nazis. He said there were fine people on both sides, igniting a storm of criticism by seemingly supporting the white supremacists. The AFL-CIO immediately reacted by pulling out of the Council on Manufacturing. AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka was asked why the federation had done so.
First of all, we obviously didn't support Mr. Trump in the election. We endorsed and actively supported his opponent. But after the election, they reached out and we reached out and we sat down and talked. And what I said to them at that time is that we'll judge you by what you do. If you do things that are good for working people, we will support them. If you do things that are bad for working people, then we will oppose you. We immediately went into that mode. When he started attacking things like health and safety standards, coal mine standards, and those regulations, I had several meetings with the administration, told them the adverse and bad effect that had on workers, showed them a position that would reverse that and actually help workers, make places more safe, or increase wages, and gave that to the administration. Unfortunately, in most cases, that wasn't taken. I think the difficulty that you had was you had two factions in the White House. You had one faction that actually had some of the policies that we would have supported on trade and infrastructure, but they turned out to be racist. And on the other hand, you had people that weren't racist, but they were Wall Streeters. And the Wall Streeters began to dominate the administration and has moved his agenda back to everything that I think they fought against in the election. The committee itself, the manufacturing committee, it became a sort of a way to get every regulation that they didn't want to have to deal with off the playing field, and that was their solution for helping manufacturing. And obviously, we didn't agree with a lot of that. But then we had the Charlottesville thing, and the president made what I considered to be a terrible statement. The next day, he corrected it, and then the next day after that, he doubled down on the first day. And there were two issues. There was the symbolism of being connected with him, with that type of a statement that, as I said earlier, was a spirited defense of white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and other groups of that sort. And we were not going to be associated with that, so we made the decision, after consulting with a number of my affiliates, we made the decision to get off the council, and we made the conscious decision that it was intolerable.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
The billionaires don't want you to vote this year. We'll send you a message that's loud and clear, that the votes can't be counted in your community.
Oh, yeah, Paul Weyrich. I was watching the Reagan documentary over on CNN the other night, and there was Paul Weyrich. There was his mug there, one of the co-founders of the Heritage Foundation. And in that clip, back in 1980, that's from 1980, he's speaking to 20,000 Baptist ministers. Understand how close the radical right and religion have been for a very long time. And he's telling these pastors, hey, we don't want everybody voting. We want to hold down those people. We want our people to vote. If we can get more, Christian warriors to come out and vote, then it's going to be better for us, and we'll be able to go through all of our nonsense. And then they figured out, hey, all of the ways in which to hold down those people from voting. I mean, 2000, you had the whole voting while black thing. Anyone's name who sounded like it could be a felon's name, purged from the rolls. In fact, 90,000 people off of the voting rolls in 2000. In a state where, I think Gore lost by like 500 votes. Do you think those 90,000 people who were thrown off the voting rolls and not allowed to vote, do you think that more than 500 of them in the aggregate would have voted for Gore? I think probably 70,000 of the 90 would have voted for Gore. And this would be a completely different country, but they've learned to play the game. You top that on 2004, you had the caging. You go, the voting machines, the voter ID stuff, and now you've got the gerrymandering. And look, gerrymandering is not new. It's just that we've really figured out how to do it on the next level. With computer algorithms and all of the precision of by household figuring out which votes are where. This has become a real problem. In fact, there's a Supreme Court coming up a case coming up this October 3rd. The U.S. Supreme Court's going to hear Gill versus Whitford, which is the Wisconsin case on gerrymandering. And look, they haven't really, they've never said The court has never said whether an electoral map that benefits one party who's in power is unconstitutional because it gives them more power. Understand, here in Pennsylvania, when they drew the maps, the Republicans had the power, and they increased their ability. In fact, the Brennan Center says, in Congress, in the House of Representatives, what you have is, probably 16, 17 seats that Republicans now control because of gerrymandering. And the reason I bring this up is you've got a number of Republicans, people like, former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, Ohio Governor John Kasich, Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows. You've got these Republicans joining with a bunch of other Republicans and Democrats. In fact, 26 Republicans, 39 Democrats from 8 states who have filed an amicus brief, saying, hey, you've got to rule the Wisconsin map unconstitutional. They write, McCain and White House senators, they write in their brief, Americans don't like gerrymandering. They see it as mischief. And absent a legal remedy, their sense of powerlessness and discouragement has increased, deepening the crisis of confidence in our democracy. They write, we share this perspective. We see wasted votes and silenced voices. We see hidden power, and we see a correctable problem. And the question is, which way does the Supreme Court go? Which way does Anthony Kennedy, again, the most powerful guy on the Supreme Court, because he is that swing vote. You go back to 2004 with the Jubileer case right here in Pennsylvania. He said he couldn't see it. How will he fly this time? Now that there's actual data. It'll be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to it. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, the news with Talk Media News. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Can you stand it? Oh, tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab or will you be a man? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2011. That was the day hundreds of ILWU strikers blocked railroad tracks near Longview, Washington. They hoped to stop grain shipments from moving in and out of the EGT grain terminal. Longshoremen had been sitting down on the tracks throughout the summer, resulting in over 100 arrests. No trains had moved in or out of the terminal since July. But then a federal judge issued an injunction against ILWU pickets. The BNSF Railroad tried to move grain once again. ILWU picketers in Vancouver were able to hold off the train until police forcibly dispersed the crowd. Then, hundreds gathered at Longview to block the train from coming in. That's when police went on the offensive. They used clubs and pepper spray against the longshoremen, arresting 19. They threw ILWU President Bob McElrath to the ground. Rumors spread that police had broken his arm. Hundreds of regional longshoremen rushed to Longview. The Seattle and Tacoma ports shut down in protest. The next morning, 10,000 tons of grain were opened onto the railroad tracks. The grain export terminal was the first to be built in the Pacific Northwest in almost 30 years. EGT hoped to undercut the powerful ILWU, who controlled operations at the port since its founding in the 1930s. The union refused to agree to work 12-hour shifts at straight time. The EGT hoped to break the hiring hall by refusing to recognize maintenance and inside workers at the terminal. They then attempted to fill jobs with workers from the operating engineers, but the ILWU persevered. By the end of January, EGT had backed off many of its demands, negotiations resumed, and days later, the contract was signed.
Most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
So Donald Jr. is supposed to be testifying in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee panel of staffers today on the big meeting that happened in June of 2016 with the so-called Russian-backed lawyer. I can't pronounce her name. I'm not even going to try. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of this. Now, it's going to be transcribed behind closed doors. I don't know if we'll get to see what was actually said, but again, the more that starts getting written, the more that the what happened in their view starts being documented, the more the lies, the deceit, the more all of that stuff tightens around them. So interesting day today. Now, understand this was originally scheduled for back in July, just getting around to it now. Look, they're back from vacation. Got to do something. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Victoria, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
Was that not plausible?
That was.
Okay.
I liked it, actually. Very
Good.
cheery and upbeat. Yeah. So what's going on?
Okay. So, well, we can start with the sublime and we can go to the ridiculous. Let's start with the awful, and that, of course, is Category 5 Hurricane Irma. Hurricane Irma has been lashing the Caribbean, has damaged every home, just about every dwelling, as far as we can tell, in the tiny island of Barbados, which is astonishing. There are about 1 million people without power in Puerto Rico that we know of. That's half the population. And in Puerto Rico, where they've had a decade-long economic crisis, the head of their power agency says that because they've cut back on staff and funding, and because of deteriorating infrastructure, some people may not have power back for 4 to 6 months.
Wow.
Which is just awful. It's barreling down on the Bahamas now, and of course Cuba. And then it's heading through, and then it's expected to Friday night to be well over Cuba today and tonight, and then Saturday late tonight, then Saturday morning, it's hitting the Keys and the southern tip of Florida, and then going straight up Florida, basically all day tomorrow. If it sticks with its present course, all day tomorrow. And into Sunday morning, and then by Sunday evening, if it sticks with its present course, it will hit Georgia, and then South Carolina Sunday evening, Monday morning, North Carolina. Then it's headed for Virginia, West Virginia, and if it continues, it's coming actually straight for me in Maryland.
Wow.
And Washington, D.C.
I mean, you see these hurricanes, you go, at some point, do we just not move to the center of the country?
Well, then you get a tornado.
Yeah, I guess. But, the good thing, there's the good thing that will come out of this is there'll be lots of employment, there'll be lots of rebuilding until the next one comes and wipes it all away.
Well, Jose is coming straight after it.
Right.
Now, Jose is much weaker. Right now, it is a Category 1, but it is strengthening. Katia is in the Gulf, so that's hitting somewhere else. And I don't know what the L is. L could be for lurch. I've no idea.
Yeah, I've been saying...
M could be for mother, and then you're about to lose your license.
Yeah, it could be. No, I've said this morning, I think what we should do is we should name the hurricanes after the climate deniers, so that we at least know who they are.
This is what's so amazing, because one of the things I was reading on the AP was that the fuel. It was a fascinating line. The fuel of hurricanes is warm water, and Irma is over water that is something like 1.8 degree warmer than normal, and so it's like lapping it up like pet treats or Big Macs.
Yeah, I was watching CNN last night, and they were saying, it's actually growing stronger by the day, even as it's hitting land. I mean, it's horrible, and Wow. I mean,
Do they have special hurricane music? I don't. I won't have it on. I won't have any of them on. Any of the cable news is on. I just read.
Okay.
I just look at Hurricane Central.
Okay. Well,
do they have special music?
I don't actually.
No, I mean like on CNN, special hurricane music.
I don't actually know, to be honest. I wasn't really paying that much attention, but I was, watching the models, and I'm hoping it does. I'm hoping it stays east. It stays out in the ocean and isn't as horrible as, they were making it sound it's going to be. It's going to take out the entire state of Florida and it's all over. That kind of left me scratching my head. But
well, the network anchors are headed for Florida. That's a bad sign.
Yeah. Well, maybe they'll.
I mean, it doesn't look like it has time to head out to sea before it hits Florida. I know nothing about meteorology, but I'm just looking at the model right now at the National Hurricane Center. Doesn't look, but whether it might have time to shear off before it hits everywhere else, I don't know. The thing is, it's so big and so wide that even if you're not in line. I mean, I'm looking at Tennessee. I used to live in Nashville. My best friends live in Nashville. I mean, it's so wide. They're going to get dreadful weather.
Yeah.
Dreadful. And they're not even in the line. I'm looking at Alabama, Mississippi. I mean, not Louisiana. They just got hit. But Mississippi, Alabama, they're not even in the line. They're going to get terrible weather. The Gulf's going to get hit.
Yeah, well... So where are the evangelicals saying God's angry with us?
This is what I don't quite understand, because I thought they were angry because of Obama.
Yeah, I thought so too. And these storms have been much worse. And in three of them, you got three hurricanes go simultaneously. I think they were saying that hasn't happened in a whole bunch of years.
There's four, because we had Harvey, Irma, Jose, and Katia.
Not good. I'm still waiting for my evangelical friends to come out and say it's.
Well, I think you should start watching. Turn off CNN. Put on what's Joel Osteen got to say about it.
I can't possibly watch that giggling charlatan idiot. I just cannot possibly. Can't stomach it. I mean, he looks like a con man from the word go. I wouldn't. He's the kind of guy I would expect to see at a used car lot.
You wouldn't?
No, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. No. Would you buy a used car from that guy, honestly?
No. What about the 700 Club? Is that still on?
Oh, I don't know. I can't tolerate that. I can't tolerate people who fleece the mentally challenged. I just can't do it.
So you're not going to watch any of them and find out why they say God's doing it?
No, because you know what, I really don't care what they have to say. I mean, and it's a horrible thing to say, but they've just got no credibility with me whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is that we've done it. I mean, who did equations at school? Hands up. Who did equations?
Yeah.
1 and 1 equals 2. So if you add, such and such to the atmosphere, you're going to get thus and so.
No, it's angry God. Because look, I've got a lot. I know a lot of homeschooler folks who say that the only book the kid needs to read is in the Bible, and I say, well, open it up and show me how to do 1 + 1. They can't.
No, but there's an awful lot of accounting in the Bible in some chapters.
Yeah.
A lot of counting of wheat.
Well, wheat is important.
It is important, and they counted it, and they got it right. So they had math.
All right. Well, is there any hope? I mean, seriously.
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
All right. There you go. So
you're my only hope.
All right. Well, last question, because you've got the big to-do, the big hurricane there in the Oval Office. Republicans not thrilled today, huh?
They are livid. They feel that President Trump has just handed the Democrats one of those big bronze presidential medals that they're selling on his website for $45. And that they've given Schumer and Pelosi massive leverage for the next 3 months in every deal that needs to be done, immigration and all these other things. And they've chopped the legs out under the Republicans. And that, who knows? He's so angry with Ryan and McConnell because he hasn't had a win from them. Maybe he did it deliberately.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fun to watch how this all plays out. Victoria, I appreciate you taking some time for us and sharing the hurricane with us.
Thank you so much.
Always good to talk to you. Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka says despite not supporting Trump, the Labor Federation has met with Trump's administration laying out things that would help workers. The AFL-CIO also has made it clear that if Trump embraces policies that really help workers, the AFL-CIO will support those policies. But Trumka says instead of helping workers, Trump has been hurting us, and the AFL-CIO's advice on how to really help workers, for the most part, has been ignored.
When he started attacking things like health and safety standards, coal mine standards, and those regulations, I had several meetings with the administration, told them the adverse and bad effect that had on workers, showed them a position that would reverse that and actually help workers, make places more safe or increase wages, and gave that to the administration. Unfortunately, in most cases, that wasn't taken.
Organized labor is part of the Hurricane Harvey relief effort. The Texas Workers Relief Fund was set up by the Texas AFL-CIO. The National AFL-CIO is donating $100,000 to that fund and is raising $5 million more. The AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust is also investing $500 million over 5 years into affordable housing in areas affected by Harvey. National Nurses United is deploying over 1,000 volunteer nurses to hurricane-hit areas, from first responders to IBEW electrical workers working overtime to restore and repair damage to the electric power grid. Labor is pitching in to help. The AFL-CIO also says the Building Investment Trust, a bank collective trust that provides risk-adjusted returns for union pension plans, and ULICO, a labor movement-affiliated financial service company, are working with the AFL-CIO on job-creating commercial real estate and infrastructure investment. The AFL-CIO's Liz Schuler says working people and our unions all across America are giving our cash donations, our investment capital, and our solidarity. Gallup says 61% of Americans approve of labor unions. It's the annual poll Gallup has been doing on unions since 1936, always showing strong support for labor unions. Gallup says that number is the highest percentage since the 65% approval recorded in 2003. According to decades of annual Gallup polling results, historically unions have enjoyed strong support from the American public. In 1936, 72% of Americans approved of labor unions. Union approval peaked in the 1950s when it reached 75% in 1953 and 1957.
Let's get America working. We must build, maintain, and repair our nation's crumbling infrastructure. Teamsters support a bipartisan approach to creating good jobs for American workers. Learn more at letsgetamericaworking.com. Teamsters strong, America stronger.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It is for this reason that I must tell those who fail to report for duty this morning they are in violation of the law, and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
Whatever happened to America? She was sold 26 long years ago. Give her the door, we are jumping off the rail. Any hope for common John B. sales?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. At the website, ricksmithshow.com. Our quote of the day from a letter addressed to Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta. The signatories of the letters point out that the Hall of Honor of the Department of Labor has the mission to honor those folks who elevate working conditions, wages, and the overall quality of life of American working families. They write, quote, President Reagan's tenure in office and the legacy of that tenure have done precisely the opposite. To place him next to the brave men and women that the department has honored in the past is the height of hypocrisy and an affront to this country's working people. And look, I'm sure there's an unedited version somewhere filled with a lot of non-FCC compliant verbiage, not suitable for broadcasting, obviously. And I'll bet the kind of language that would make the late George Carlin even blush. But to have Ronald Reagan in that Hall of Honor when his greatest achievement was, well, that little clip you just heard, firing 11,000 Patco workers, and not just firing from their jobs, but firing them forever, never allowed to have federal employment again. Never. It's that kind of, that's what got him into the Hall. Isn't that wonderful? Here to talk about that story and, well, a couple of other things we can bang around. I've asked labor reporter Dave Jamieson to come talk with us. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, good to be here.
So what do you think? Does Ronald Reagan belong in the Hall of Honor?
I think this is some grade A trolling by the Trump White House. My personal opinion is, even you set aside Patco and everything, he's an odd choice because it really seems his only qualification for being inducted is that he is a president who at one point had also happened to be a union leader. He was the president of the Screen Actors Guild for several terms. Look, there are a lot of union presidents out there, past and present. They don't all belong in the Hall of Honor, and I don't know that what Reagan did in leading SAG made him deserving of any honor like that. I mean, you look at the people who are in this Hall of Honor. We're talking about John Lewis, Francis Perkins, Eugene Debs, Walter Reuther, Mother Jones, and so on. These are real heavy hitters who had huge impact on labor in this country. And yeah, I mean, Reagan sure did. Maybe if this were like the Time Magazine Person of the Year, where it's not about whether they did good or bad things, it's about how notable the things they did were. In that sense, yeah, Reagan does deserve a major piece in the history of labor in this country, but it's really because of the way he changed things through the Patco strike. And we can debate what the breaking of that strike actually did and the role it may have played in diminishing organized labor in this country. And people probably a lot of times overstate its effects, but symbolically it was huge. It sent a message that you can break a union. It sent a huge message to the private sector that this is something you can do, and it emboldened a lot of corporations after that. So the impact of that was huge. But like I said, I mean, this is just some really top grade trolling by the White House here.
It's what the Republicans have done for years. I mean, they've slapped Reagan's name all over everything. And the odd thing about it is Reagan wouldn't even be identified in today's Republican Party. But, in talking about the Patco strike, I've said for a long time that was really the shot heard across the boardroom, because it basically said, hey, it's open season. Because, as I pointed out, not only did he fire the Patco workers, he barred them from federal employment ever. I mean, so it's not only that you got rid of them, you blacklisted them, and that was, even more to the extreme. Because look, the Patco union had endorsed him, and as I understand the history, they had said, look, this is coming. We're fighting for, obviously better wages, hours, but mostly conditions, because how antiquated the equipment was.
That's right. Yeah, somebody had tweeted at me. Maybe the Patco leaders who'd endorsed Reagan should be in that hall, or some hall of its kind. But yeah, I think we're still seeing the legacy of that today. You look at the number of strikes is way down historically, at just a fraction of what it used to be. And of course, that's partly a function of just reduced union membership as a share of the economy. But it's also that the strike has been reduced as a weapon, and what has increased is the number of lockouts by employers. That has skyrocketed in recent years, and that's because employers aren't afraid to do that anymore. And part of that grew out of the PATCO legacy, I think.
Yeah, and because look, the NLRB has basically been toothless during Republican administrations and actually used as a weapon. And you see that the ossification of labor law over the last 70 years has me continually asking, when do we say that the New Deal era labor peace is over and we end up back with more people in the streets as we saw on Monday?
Yeah, and what this sort of look, obviously, putting Reagan in the Labor Department's Hall of Honor, this isn't like policy that impacts anybody, right? But it is symbolic, and it does say something, and it says a lot, especially when you look at the other things that this administration is doing in terms of labor right now. Put two conservatives up for the NLRB, one of whom has a lot of people upset because doesn't have really much experience as a practicing labor attorney, we can see the direction the board is going to go in. It's clearly going to head in a more favorable direction towards employers. Probably going to wipe out a lot of the union-friendly decisions that were made in the last several years. We see what's going on over at the Labor Department now, where they're rescinding rules and regulations that were put in place that unions had wanted to see put in place. And, it's just we see this set against the campaign that Trump ran, saying he was for regular working folks. That just obviously doesn't jibe with a lot of what he is doing policy-wise and what his people are doing policy-wise right now.
Yeah, what's frustrating to me, and I've had a couple of former NLRB folks on the show over the years, and they said the Bush years is when the NLRB became really political, and you ended up having these wide swings, and that's not good for labor law in this country. It's not good for working people, but it's not good for the economy to have these extreme swings. And it's really not good for employers either, because they don't even know the rules of the game from day to day.
I agree. The board was not always like this. And look, I've only been covering it for a few years now, but I've talked with people who've been around, and a lot of people, I think on both sides, don't like these wild swings and this vacillation. And we're at a point where basically, if there's a Democrat in the White House, then the AFL-CIO and others basically choose who goes on the board. If there's a Republican, it's up to the Chamber of Commerce. And they just essentially vacate one another's decisions. And it's really not a great way to carry out and interpret and enforce the law, right? It doesn't give a lot of stability to the framework around organizing, and it's just kind of a mess. And I think we're going to see that now. You look at in the Obama years, it wasn't too long ago that graduate students got a green light to unionize at private schools, and we'll probably see that undone in 2 or 3 years whenever the new board can get around to doing that, and it just makes it very hard for unions to function in this kind of climate.
Right, and the NLRB isn't the only place that's become political. I mean, I look at some of the oversight positions, and you just saw the other day, and we had talked about the person that Trump is going to appoint as head of the Mine Safety and Health Administration, someone who was former coal baron CEO, and you go, wait a second, we're going to put not just the fox in charge of the hen hound, but whoever eats foxes, that's who we're putting in charge.
Yeah, David Sataslo, he ran a company called Rhino Resources. This was a name I had not been heard batting around, but the talk all along was that essentially they were going to nominate somebody who the coal operators and the coal lobby wanted nominated, and that appears to be borne out already. Sataslo gave an interview to his hometown paper in Wheeling, and he said, Bob Murray called me up and said, hey, we want you to do this job. We want you to come out of retirement and do this MSHA thing. And lo and behold, he is the nominee. So, look, this guy, he had been a miner himself, right? He was a UMWA miner when he started out in the mines 40 years ago or whatever. Rose his way up, became a foreman, then a supervisor. Eventually, he becomes an executive, and that's how he ended his career. I don't want to judge him yet. Who knows? But this guy, only a couple years ago, was running a coal company, right? A coal company that had its own run-ins with MSHA. MSHA threatened to put one of their mines on the pattern of violations list, which is basically repeat offenders. It's like the worst list you can land on. They got fined over $100,000 over when a mine foreman got killed at one of their mines. And so the world he comes from is a world that generally does not like MSHA. They view MSHA as an annoyance. They view MSHA as an entity that gets in their hair, that slows down production. And that's the worry with putting someone, an erstwhile executive, in charge of MSHA, is that it's I can't imagine it's easy to flip that switch and to start seeing things from the other side. You have to hope that if he becomes the assistant secretary and he gets, if the Senate confirms him, that he's going to remember what it was like 40 years ago to be the miner underground rather than the guy sitting in the boardroom.
Yeah, and the fact that Bob Murray wanted him from the Crandall Canyon mine collapse fame, right there, strike against him in my view.
This is a guy, Bob Murray is on record saying that MSHA is harassment in his view. That regulation, that inspectors coming in to inspect safety, that is harassment in his view. And this is the guy who apparently had a huge say in this nomination. And as we all know, Murray is a big Trump donor, big Trump booster. And he was out there for him, and now he's obviously has a lot to say with the administration.
So let me ask you this. I mean, isn't this, and maybe you don't know, but I would have to imagine that this is a slap in the face to those miners that Trump has been courting and that overwhelmingly voted for him, because he basically took the boss who has, created, almost poverty wages in those industries since the breaking of a lot of the unions and horrible working conditions and all of this, and put the boss in charge.
Yeah. There's a lot of smoke around, the Trump campaign and the Trump presidency when it comes to coal. They are out there during these jobs reports talking about tens of thousands. I think they even said 100,000 coal jobs being created. Well, you look at the actual numbers. There's, I think, according to the last job report, year over year, there's 2,100 more coal miners now than there were last August. 2,000, we're talking 2,000 and change. So, there's the jobs piece of it, and then there's this regulation piece of it. And look, I think a lot of coal miners, you talk to them, you drive through parts of Appalachia, and you're going to see they're not big fans of the EPA there, right? And people probably have mixed feelings about MSHA too, but I think miners on the whole do like knowing that there's an agency there that's going to protect them. And it'll be interesting to see, and I want to talk to a lot of them about how they feel about an executive who's the nature of his job, the number one goal is production, keeping the flow, the coal running. There's a say, if the coal don't flow, you must go down on the mines. I don't know how they're going to feel about a guy who's in the boardroom coming to be the guy who's supposed to make sure that their mine doesn't collapse, to make sure there isn't so much coal dust that they're getting black lung disease. So we'll see.
It'll be interesting. And as you talk to them, I'd love to have you back and share some of their thoughts with us as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate the time, Dave. Always great talking with you, man.
Thanks, Rick. Good talking to you.
Good stuff. Dave Jamison, labor reporter over at Huffington Post. If you want to check out some of his work, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how you can take a look at that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around and listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Got no time now to go and cry now before I take a job. Don't wanna go
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1916. That was the day that the Federal Employees Compensation Act was signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson. The act was sponsored by Senator John Kern, a Democrat from Indiana, and Daniel McGillicuddy, a Democratic congressman from Maine. The act provided compensation for federal civil service employees that lost wages because they were hurt or killed on the job. There was great debate at the time over whether employees injured at work deserved to be compensated. Before the turn of the 20th century, those who sustained workplace injuries had little recourse. Employers blamed workers for accidents and typically refused compensation, leaving families destitute. Edward Gaynor, the president of the National Association of Letter Carriers, explained the debate around the 1916 proposal, saying, quote, "The only question, the fundamental question involved in this discussion is whether or not society should bear the burden of the injured worker in any industry." Increasingly, some lawmakers were beginning to make the case that society should indeed bear that burden. Workers and labor leaders organized around issues of workplace safety and demanded a compensation if they were injured on the job. The law providing such a safety net for federal employees was passed through the House of Representatives by an overwhelming margin of 288 to 6. Although the act only applied to federal employees, it was an important step forward in recognizing that all workers deserve to be compensated for workplace injuries. The Federal Office of Workers' Compensation Programs that operates today traces its history directly back to the 1916 Act. And because of this 1916 Act, 3 million federal employees and their families are covered under the Act's protection. Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. I mean, you think about it for a second. You're putting the fox in charge of the hen house. When you've got these CEOs who have been running these companies who view oversight, who view the protections of organizations like Mencha, you see them as well too much. In fact, there was we talked about this the other day. He was one of these guys who, they fought everything into the courts to kind of, jam it all up. Kind of the Don Blankenship lead. If you remember Don Blankenship, the head of Massey Energy, his famous memo was, we don't deal with that safety stuff. We get paid to run coal. And, never mind the safety. We can get rid of you and all of that. Not a big deal. For me, having that cop on the beat, having that safety protection there, I think is really very important. And yet what we end up having is now you're going to have someone who's extremely friendly to the corporate side, extremely friendly to overlooking some of those violations, like having too much dust down in the mines, like not having proper airflow, not having proper safety precautions, or or anything. And as Dave said, maybe he's going to harken back to his days as a miner 40 years ago and remember what it's like. I wouldn't hold my breath. I would not hold my breath at all. Here's some good news coming out of D.C. Elizabeth Warren, senator from Massachusetts, she has said she is going to be co-sponsoring Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill. And this is another one of those moments where the fight is going to happen in front of us. And we're going to have to relitigate the 2016 election over again. And for me, there's a lot of very smart policy. As someone who wants to know, how do we make things better? How do we make people's lives better? How do we move forward as a working class? How do we do what our grandparents' generation did? I mean, there's got to be a model for this. Because you think about, and I go back to stories my grandparents told me. When they first got married, they were homeless, living in a car, and through their working lives, they saw poverty wage jobs become good, solid, middle class income jobs that supported a family usually on one income. And those jobs got better and better and better with every contract. In fact, so much so, and this is one of those moments where you go, we're never going to see this again. When my grandparents bought their house in the middle 60s, by the time it was the late 70s, you're talking maybe 12, 15 years later, their mortgage was a day's pay. Now, obviously, we had gone through the stagflation period of the 70s, and union contracts had automatic wage increases when the cost of living went up. You don't see that today because not as many workers are covered by contracts. But think about it. I know people who have, on a modest home, $800, $1,000 a month mortgages. Imagine that being your daily pay. That's what they lived through. And at the end of it, they lived out their lives with dignity, with respect, with a reasonable pension that they didn't have to worry about, hey, am I going to be able to pay the bills? Hey, am I going to be able to make it to tomorrow? There was some dignity there. Understand, the next generation, my generation going to retire, we're not going to have that same kind of security. Every time we turn around, you've got politicians, mostly on the Republican side, saying, hey, how do we destroy what little safety net is left, what little security is left? And I've been saying for a long time, the only way we stop the free fall is that we make sure that people get health care from cradle to grave. You want to solve some of our societal problems? Make sure that everyone's in the game, make sure that everyone's covered from start to finish, and that we hold people accountable who are causing all of the degradation, the pollution, all of that. Make that part of it. Instead of having all these Band-Aid programs where we're going to take care of, sick children over here because we're sympathetic to them, or we're going to take care of seniors over here because we're sympathetic to them, and, oh, well, there's some really poor people here, we've got to take care of them, or some disabled. We've got all these hodgepodge. How about having one very simple pool? Basic insurance. The idea of everybody in the pot, the healthy paying for the sick, because eventually the healthy are going to get sick, and the healthy behind us come in and they help pay for the next generation. It seems sane, it seems rational. I know something we probably are not going to try. But I'm thrilled to see that Sanders is pushing forward on this. Again, another one of those policy initiatives that I absolutely agree with. Now, look, you've got now Elizabeth Warren jumping onto this. You had last week, it was that Kamala Harris out of California. And you even had John Tester from Montana, who really a very conservative Democrat, because it makes sense. I mean, this is the frustrating part of all this. We could have smart policy. We could, if we, and I blame a lot of this on us, on we the voters, because we've bought into this horse race. We've bought into this my team versus your team. We've bought into this if I win, you lose kind of mentality. Instead of saying what moves us all forward. We used to have statesmen. I wonder what happened to them. Oh, that's right. The big corporate money and the idea that dollars are votes has really destroyed our system. And the other part of this is I don't see anything positive really happening until we get the corrosive, poisonous effects of money out of our system. And I know you're never going to get it entirely, but this idea of having all of these dark sources, because look, we're starting to see now what the Russians were able to get away with. In fact, you had Facebook come out yesterday and say, well, the Russian troll farms, they bought about $100,000 worth of ads from us. And I'm going, 100,000? And that's what you're admitting to? I wonder how much it really is. I was watching CNN last night, and you had one of these crazy conservative groups on there saying, call us and sign up if you want to support, Donald Trump against these libtard. And you go, wait a second. How crazy is this? But at least something positive happening. Because this, again, is a conversation that as a country we should be having. The idea that everybody gets health care. Because the reality is, I talk to people all the time. Their health care costs are outrageous. And it's getting worse. There are people of my age group who thought, you get a job, health insurance is part of the job. Not anymore. Those days are long gone. Now, I was talking to somebody the other day who was saying for a family plan where he works, it's $1,300 a month. And he only makes $50,000 a year. So out of $50,000 a year, you're talking about, close to $15,000 going away in healthcare costs. I mean, that is completely and totally outrageous. People are starving for a solution. And not lowering the costs of premiums by taking health care away or giving crummy plans that cover anything, but having good, solid, stable insurance so that if people get sick, they get care. Simple to me. Just simple. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back and talk a little bit about, the latest on the DACA, where we're going, what it's doing. Evidently, the president has tweeted something out again today. Just nuts.
10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1980. The 32nd annual Emmy Awards show took place despite 51 of the 52 nominated performers boycotting the event. At issue was a strike by the members of the Screen Actors Guild. Powers Booth was the only nominated actor to attend. He won the Emmy that year for portraying the cult leader Jim Jones in a made-for-TV movie. In his acceptance speech, he acknowledged his lonely presence at the Emmys. He said, "This is either the most courageous moment of my career or the stupidest." SAG members, along with the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists and the American Federation of Musicians, all went on strike that summer. Members of the Screen Actors Guild were displeased with their salaries. They wanted a 32% increase. They were also concerned about changes in the industry. They did not feel they were being compensated for the revenue they helped generate through paid cable and video cassettes. The Screen Actors Guild had its origins in the Maskers Club. Actors formed that club because they were upset with the grueling hours expected of them by Hollywood studios. Eventually, in 1933, the Screen Actors Guild was started. After initial hesitation by some big-name actors to join the union, SAG membership grew from 80 to more than 4,000 members. Many famous actors supported the union, including Humphrey Bogart and James Cagney. In the late 1940s, future President Ronald Reagan was elected president and served as president of SAG for 7 terms. The 1980 strike was one of the longer strikes in the union's history, lasting 94 days and settling at the end of October.
Hooray for Hollywood, that phony super coney Hollywood.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
On now, it's back to the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
I got 800 miles of open border right outside my door. There's Minutemen and little pickup trucks who've declared their own dang war. Now the government wants to build a barrier like old Berlin, 8 feet tall. But if Uncle Sam sends the illegals home, who's gonna build the wall? Who's gonna build your wall, boy?
Another one of these, what exactly is this president thinking? Wow. This morning, another Trump tweet. He writes, "For all those DACA that are concerned about your status during the 6-month period, you have nothing to worry about. No action." You go, then what exactly What exactly is all this about? What exactly is wrong with you? I mean, just plain nuts. And the thing is you look at this, and as a country, the majority of us think that these people should be able to stay. They're employed. They were vetted. They've tried to go through the process, and now you're going to pull the rug out. It's just nuts. And here to talk about the latest bit out of the White House, I've asked Tom Javits to come talk with us. He's Vice President for Immigration Policy at the Center for American Progress. Tom, thanks for taking time for us.
Sure, thanks so much.
So, what do you think of this latest little tweet? You've got nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to understand what the president's thinking on many matters, but certainly on this matter. I mean, the president earlier this week rolled out Attorney General Sessions to announce an end to the DACA program. Attorney General Sessions is the strongest opponent of DACA in the administration and was the strongest opponent in Congress over the previous 5 years. The program does not even reside in the Department of Justice. It resides in the Department of Homeland Security. And so obviously if they'd wanted someone other than the president to make this important announcement, they could have turned to the person who administers the program, the acting secretary. But instead they chose Attorney General Sessions. And then later that very same day, the president tweeted out that if Congress doesn't take action in the next 6 months, he might revisit the decision, which itself made no sense since the action that DHS took earlier in the day was to totally eliminate the program, to rescind the memo, and announce that they thought they were doing that because it was unconstitutional. So how the president was planning on walking it back is unclear anyway. But I will say about this tweet in particular, DACA recipients weren't taking their protections for granted in the previous 8 months when this administration hadn't yet ended the program. We've seen DACA recipients around the country get arrested, detained, and in at least one case deported. The most recent case being the case of a mother of two, one infant child, who worked for Amazon, who was just arrested and held in five different facilities over a 1 week period just about 10 days ago. So the assurances of this president that they won't get touched or whatever aren't worth the pixels that they're tweeted on.
Yeah, I don't see anything that comes out of the Oval Office today as viable because look, I guess it depends on the position of the moon, whether he got an extra scoop of ice cream. I don't really know how he makes decisions.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest question. I mean, this decision shouldn't be a hard one. The American people very strongly support providing a permanent path to protection for this population. It is good for the economy. You have 600 plus major CEOs standing up right now and saying that they want to see a permanent path to protection for this population. You have law enforcement coming forward. You have thousands of faith leaders around the country who are stepping forward, and civic leaders, again, around the country. The impact of this on the national economy would be significant. We're looking at about $460 billion in gross domestic product over about a decade that would be lost, and that impact would be felt in every single state around the country. We know from surveys of this population, they live in every part of the country. They're involved in every single industry, and they are extremely productive. 91% are in the workforce today. So when March 6th rolls around and you start seeing 1,500 people losing their protection, losing their work authorization, and losing their jobs every single workday, it's going to begin getting driven home into communities around the country that this doesn't just affect these 800,000 young people; it affects them as well.
Well, what do you say to the argument? Because I've had a number of people say, well, you know what? We got to get rid of these people, Tom, because they're taking jobs from Americans. And I've had someone address that very directly, saying, every day when those people get fired, there'll be Americans to take those jobs.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that you very often hear. I will say, generally speaking, that economists of all stripes, looking at the broader unauthorized immigrant population, have debunked that idea time and time again. In this population in particular, DACA recipients in particular, are more heavily concentrated in particular industries that have even lower unemployment rates than the national unemployment rate, which is itself low. So they're in education and health services, for instance, that have very low unemployment rate, and that's where these folks are working. But by and large, again, they're economic contributors. We have 5% of these individuals start their own businesses, create jobs for American workers. And it's just simply not the case that if you were to extract them from the workforce, you'd see those jobs getting filled with American workers. I'll say one more thing on that point, too. I think taking a step back, it's also important to think about who this population is when you make that criticism, right? The average age that people came here when they qualify for DACA, for those folks who qualify for DACA, is around 6 years of age. These are people who came here as extremely young kids. When you look at Jesus Contreras, the paramedic who was wading through the floodwaters in Harvey for 6 days rescuing his fellow Texans, and you hear him talk, he sounds like a Texan, right? I mean, that guy has a huge Texas tattoo on his bulging bicep. I mean, the idea that he's taking jobs away from an American presumes that he's less American in some ways than those other folks, and it just doesn't bear out when you look at who these people are.
Yeah, and the question is where do they go back to? I mean, because as you said, they came here when they were 6 years old. They don't know anything about the country that their parents came from. Yeah,
I mean that's absolutely true. Their connections to those countries, in many cases, don't exist at all. I'm thinking about the several thousand DACA recipients, for instance, who are from Venezuela, who are looking at what's going on in the country that they would be sent back to, and thinking about what they must be thinking about their prospect of returning safely to that country, right? I mean, so this is their home. This is the home not only that they have made for themselves, but that has welcomed them in their communities. By definition, just to clarify, take one step back again, in order to qualify for DACA, the 800,000 young people who have DACA today have come forward to the federal government, have provided their biometric data, they've provided their biographic data, they've given their fingerprints, their addresses, they've paid a fee, and they've gone through extensive criminal and security background checks. And so, this population basically has been thoroughly vetted. And is contributing effectively and productively to the country.
Or to use a Trump frame, they went through extreme vetting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right, and they've done it periodically. For a number of these folks, they've actually done this now 3 times because they got protection first in 2012, they then renewed in 2014, they then renewed again in 2016. And so you have individuals who have time and time again not only qualified on the front end, but then by continuing to meet the requirements of the initiative and by continuing to play by the rules and come forward, they've proven their continuing desert.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I grew up in Cleveland, where you had a large contingent of Polish Americans who came here, a large number of Ukrainian folks who came here, and you could see within the same household, you saw grandmother didn't speak any English, you saw parents who spoke both languages, and then you saw the kids who spoke almost none of the original language where they came from, and that's been the path of people coming to this country for forever.
Yeah, I mean that's completely accurate. I mean a lot of these DACA recipients, again, because by definition, in order to qualify for this program that was created in 2012, you have to have been here at that time since 2007 or before. You're talking about a group of individuals who have now been here for at least 10 years, many for much, much longer than that. And so you've got about 200,000 kids who are living in these households whose parents themselves are DACA recipients. And so the impact of this on families would be tremendous. And we, one of the things I think that hasn't really sunk in for a lot of people as well, and it will over time, I think, is that there are DACA recipients, again, like I said, in every state, but they're in all your schools, they're in all your workplaces, they're in your churches, they're on your kids' sports teams. They come to your house for dinner, and you don't always know it, right? There's no particular reason why you would know it, because these are young people who are going to school and they have work authorization and they're doing the right thing. When they begin to lose that protection, or when they begin to deal with the anxiety that comes from not knowing what they're going to do once that protection expires, it's going to start hitting home in a lot of communities. I think that this really doesn't affect just this population, but also them.
Do you see any way forward for Congress to get anything done? Because look, I mean, if history has shown us anything, that Congress has been less than interested or successful at dealing with this problem. Do you see anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I spent 6.5 years working for the House Judiciary Committee and saw a couple of things. First, I saw on a number of occasions we tried to work through the immigration issue, some very genuine efforts by Democrats and Republicans to work together to come up with sensible policy solutions. I absolutely do believe there are members of Congress who are very thoughtful about this and are considerate about this and want to make the right call. I also saw the institution become more and more dysfunctional over time while I was there. But there are opportunities. There is a bill in the House and the Senate, the DREAM Act, which has strong bipartisan support in both bodies. That bill could pass today if it was brought to the floor, and I think you're going to see not just Democrats but Republicans as well, who are champions of that effort, looking for every possible effort to get that on the calendar to make sure that members at least have an opportunity to vote on it and say whether they want this thing to move forward or not.
Again, there's something to put on the list when you call your representatives, when you call your senators, and you share your thoughts.
Absolutely, and I'll say, there's a tool. There are a lot of toolkits out there, but if you go to dreamacttoolkit.org, that will allow you to see a list of the individuals who we think are the people who really should hear from their constituents, or whether by phone or by Twitter, and let them know that you support a Congress taking up the DREAM Act, and you think it's important that it be done now and without any unnecessary attacks on immigrant families or anything else in the process.
And we'll make sure we get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how folks can get their dreamacttoolkit.org. We'll get that link there as well. Again, my mindset is I hope that something gets done because we cannot have these folks pushed back into the shadows. It's not good for our country.
That's correct, yeah.
Tom, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Always great talking with you. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
A union man, brother firefighters, my friend. And the kids locked in the Capitol are fighting till the end. And we're not gonna break tonight, and we're not gonna bend. Some say the union's down, but I asked around, and everybody said, this is a union town, all down the line. This is a union town, all down the line. And if they come to strip our rights away, we'll give them hell every time. This is a union town, all down the line.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2011. That was the day hundreds of ILWU strikers blocked railroad tracks near Longview, Washington. They hoped to stop grain shipments from moving in and out of the EGT grain terminal. Longshoremen had been sitting down on the tracks throughout the summer, resulting in over 100 arrests. No trains had moved in or out of the terminal since July. But then a federal judge issued an injunction against ILWU pickets. The BNSF Railroad tried to move grain once again. ILWU picketers in Vancouver were able to hold off the train until police forcibly dispersed the crowd. Then, hundreds gathered at Longview to block the train from coming in. That's when police went on the offensive. They used clubs and pepper spray against the longshoremen, arresting 19. They threw ILWU President Bob McElrath to the ground. Rumors spread that police had broken his arm. Hundreds of regional longshoremen rushed to Longview. The Seattle and Tacoma ports shut down in protest. The next morning, 10,000 tons of grain were opened onto the railroad tracks. The grain export terminal was the first to be built in the Pacific Northwest in almost 30 years. EGT hoped to undercut the powerful ILWU, who controlled operations at the port since its founding in the 1930s. The union refused to agree to work 12-hour shifts at straight time. The EGT hoped to break the hiring hall by refusing to recognize maintenance and inside workers at the terminal. They then attempted to fill jobs with workers from the operating engineers, but the ILWU persevered. By the end of January, EGT had backed off many of its demands, negotiations resumed, and days later, the contract was signed.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. The United States has drafted a new set of sanctions against North Korea and circulated that resolution to the UN Security Council. The new sanctions come as a response to a weekend nuclear test by North Korea. According to the draft of the new sanctions, the U.S. and other countries would have the right to use military force to board any one of 9 known North Korean smuggling vessels. The sanctions also ban the export of North Korean textiles, oil, and gas, and perhaps most importantly would ban North Korean workers from being hired in other countries, where many send home cash that's used by the cash-strapped North Korean government. There's no word yet if Russia and China will back the new sanctions effort. The Spanish region of Catalonia, which includes the city of Barcelona, will vote for its independence from Spain on October 1st. The date for that referendum was nailed down by the Catalan parliament on Wednesday, with political leaders saying they will reject any efforts by the Spanish government in Madrid to block the vote. And try to block it, they will. When Catalonia held an independence referendum in 2014, the vote was annulled by Spain's constitutional court. Catalan officials who helped lead this year's referendum can also be removed from office per a 2015 law. And the European Court of Justice has rejected an appeal by Hungary and Slovakia challenging a European Union plan to relocate Syrian refugees. According to a 2015 deal aimed at lowering the refugee burden in Greece and Italy, Hungary and Slovakia were required to accept some 1,300 and 800 refugees each. The two countries argued the refugees constituted a security risk. Hungary's foreign minister couldn't contain his outrage over the court's decision, saying EU politics had, quote, raped European law and values. For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. RickSmithShow.com. So, story came out of New York City. Teamsters Joint Council 16. They were holding a petition drive to save one of their local members from being deported back to Guatemala. Eber Garcia Vasquez evidently has been deported back to Guatemala. This is a guy who's been here for 26 years. He was a Teamster member for 26 years, worked for this I think it was a sanitation company, if I'm not mistaken. They're in New York. He's got 4 kids, a wife who is an American citizen. They've been trying to get a green card, going through this whole process. Evidently, they just swept him up recently and said, yep, we're sending you back. It's this kind of nonsense. Look, nobody's saying we shouldn't go after the criminals, but people who have put roots here, who are productive members of society, who are going to work every day. It seems cruel. It does. And again, I've said from the beginning, this is a couple of generations worth of politicians looking the other way. Looking the other way when employers go, hey, you know what? We need cheap, exploitable labor. Let's put the word out, as they've always done. Look, I go back to my ancestors. They came here looking for work. They got on the boat and they showed up. They didn't have reservations. They didn't file paperwork. They showed up. They were here. And no one said, you're illegal. They walked in and they said, okay, put me to work. Because in the home country, there were, usually through the churches, oddly enough, there was like, hey, you want a job? I'll go over there. We'll help get you passage, and you'll work, and you'll basically be, in poverty and wage slavery for your entire existence. But your kids might have an opportunity, and that's always been the draw here. And what's angering is, again, you go back to these politicians for the last 40 years who have done nothing. When Ronald Reagan is the voice of sanity on this issue, there's something wrong. When he was saying, you know what, if we're going to build walls, we at least put doors in those walls so people can come in, so we can welcome people to this country. It's really bizarre how far the Republicans have gone to the extreme. But again, I go back to what I said, over a decade ago. We should be passing laws that hold these employers accountable. I don't want an exploitable element of workers in this country. You cannot have that. They have to come out of the shadows. They have to be paid at least the minimum wage. They have to be covered with unemployment benefits and workers' compensation and paying into Social Security and all of that. You cannot have a business model set up on exploiting people. You just cannot. You can't allow it in a civilized country. Look, if we want to go back and be, into the good old days, where you had a handful of, well, what do you mean good old days? We're there now. You've got a wealth class that has never been wealthier and more powerful than you have right now. And you have a desperation class of working people who are just on the treadmill trying to make it to the next day without being shot off and end up homeless. Now imagine you have these folks who especially as kids came here. They know no other country. They didn't understand what it was to be legal or undocumented or any of that. They grew up, going to school, and we invested in them. We spent the money, and I know the Republicans were whining all along, but we already did. We invested in them, educated them, and now you're going to go back. Just plain crazy. I mean, really, honestly and truthfully. Now, according to George Miranda, the president of Teamsters Joint Council 16, they're going to keep fighting and keep standing with immigrant workers and families everywhere to resist these deportations, defend DACA, and win justice for all in our communities, and good on him for doing just that. But, I mean, you look at the polling, and, about a month ago, there was a Quinnipiac poll that came out that said, look, a good number, 63% of the country, said that these folks should have should be able to stay and have a path towards citizenship. 63%, even 36% of Republicans, 86% of Democrats, 62% of independents. The number of people who said they should be able to stay, but they can't be citizens, 10%. You had 17% of Republicans saying, they can stay, but no citizenship. 6% of Democrats and 10% of independents. Now you add that together with the 36% of people who say, Republicans who say, hey, they can stay and move towards citizenship, that'd be great. You now have 46% of Republicans saying, 53% of Republicans saying that, hey, they can stay. And only 41% saying, no, they got to go. Because as a total, 22% of the country is saying that we've got to throw these people out. So, I don't know where else you're going to find polling like this. Now, that was a Quinnipiac poll. Just the other day, we talked about the Morning Consult Politico poll that said 73% of Americans support citizenship, allowing them to stay, either 58% through citizenship, 18% through permanent status. Only 15% said ship them back, which is, kind of in line with the other poll. And what's angering and frustrating is you've now thrown this wrench into this whole situation. And for what? Because now you've got Trump all over the place. And this is what bad leadership gets us. And I have to wonder, I know there's not a plan here. I know there's no grand scheme. I know there's no plan. This was just, hey, let's cause some chaos. Let's cause a distraction. Let's cause, people to get all worked up and frenzied, and to be able to say, hey, I kept my pledge. For the good of the country, please, some sanity and leadership from somewhere. Now, from what I'm seeing of this, and you throw this in with the debt ceiling, maybe Trump's going to start listening to the Democrats. Maybe he's realized the Republicans are dysfunctional from top to bottom, and the only way that he's going to be somewhat successful is to be able to reach a consensus of the sane and rational. Maybe that's it. Maybe instead of going after bad tax reform, who knows? I mean, Paul Ryan just laid out his plan, which is basically what we knew it was: tax breaks for the rich and a little window dressing for everybody else. But basically a great heist for the wealthy in this country, at the expense of the rest of us. Maybe there's some opportunity for Schumer and Pelosi to have some influence to soften that, to make it to where we have real tax reform that does benefit working people and thus stimulate the economy. Because I agree, tax cuts can stimulate the economy if targeted properly. Not giving them all to the billionaire class, because, sorry, they can't spend all of that money. But if you give it to the person who's on that treadmill trying to make it to tomorrow, You got a shot of them spending that money in the local economy and thus creating jobs. That seems sane. That seems rational. The question is, will we do it? Just really, really strange times we live in. We're going to be back on Monday. Tomorrow we're taking a planned day off to get some logistics done, some things done to help us move forward here at the big program as we continue our expansion into the TV world. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Was it the right thing to do with DACA? Right thing to do with the debt ceiling? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here Monday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like the tidal flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, in